in the middle, those two biggest ones, ultimately become those pink, smaller globs, the mature red cells. And let's see how that happens. Next slide, please. You can see here in a later version of those cells that the nuclei are becoming smaller relative to the cytoplasm. These cells look closer in size to those pink blobs around them in the perimeter. Can you kind of see that? So they're starting to become more and more mature. Next slide, please. Now they're even getting smaller. And what do you notice about, do you mind going back for just a moment, Ms. Clark? Take a look at the cytoplasm, if you would, for a moment. Remember the cytoplasm is the lightish blue stuff around the nuclei? Pretty blue, right? But light blue. Take a look at the next slide. It's not quite as light blue anymore. In fact, it's starting to look just a little pink. What's happening there? Well, the cells are starting to make hemoglobin. Hemoglobin has red pigment. It's what makes red blood cells red. So these cells are getting closer to what they want to be when they grow up, to use that cliche. And next slide, please. Now they're even closer. Those three cells in the middle there with the nuclei are just getting ready to pop out or spit out the nuclei and become actual red blood cells. That's literally how it's happening all the time in our bodies, without our, of course, paying attention. Next slide, please. So I'm going to stop for a moment and ask you all, obviously that was a very high-level overview of how blood cells are formed, but any questions or comments about that? Yes, please. Yeah.
Well, I had hemoglobin HBV.
Yes.
So does that mean that like the nuclei never came out? Or?
Boy, that's a great question. And may I tell the group a little bit about hemoglobin H disease? Thank you for sharing. So hemoglobin H disease, there are many different kinds of hemoglobin. And most of us in this room probably have a particular type of hemoglobin called adult hemoglobin. But some of us, and for good reasons actually, have different versions of hemoglobin. This young lady has hemoglobin H, which actually has some advantages to it, believe it or not. You may be aware of this already. There are studies suggesting that way back in the day, hundreds of years ago, people living in Africa who were exposed to malaria, who had hemoglobin H, were more likely to survive, that somehow this gave a protective effect. So when you wonder why the heck would God make hemoglobin H? Why not just make everybody hemoglobin adult? Well, that was one reason. People had protection against certain diseases that were in their areas. But obviously, you're not in an area with malaria, so that's not an advantage in Sacramento. But the hemoglobin H tends to work not quite as effectively as other kinds of hemoglobin. Now, fortunately, in looking at you, you look extremely healthy and capable, and I strongly suspect most people with hemoglobin H do very, very well. In rare cases, especially if people might have the sickle hemoglobin 2, sometimes there can be problems. May I ask, since you shared, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay.
Good.
Sort of. My blood levels are just a little bit low.
Mm-hmm. And that's not unusual, as you know, with hemoglobin H. To answer your question, though, your cells, your red blood cells, are formed just like mine. There's no difference because of the hemoglobin H. The only difference is that whereas mine and probably most of the people in this room have the quote-unquote adult type hemoglobin, you have more of the hemoglobin H. That's the only difference, if that starts to answer your question. Great. We're getting close to the end here, so before I give real brief final musings, any comments or questions people would like to discuss? Well, I'm just going to share one last thought. I love my field as a doctor, and I do a lot of reading to make sure that I know what I'm doing and can treat patients the right way. But I also like to read in other areas, whether it's art or history or music or what have you, languages. And I was just reading recently something that I thought holds true perhaps for all of us when it comes to how we live our lives and how we can be successful, however you define success, and we all define it differently, right? Thomas Friedman, he's a very good newspaper reporter. He's won a couple of Pulitzer Prizes, works for the New York Times. He has written a number of books, and one of them talks about how in our country we are more and more competing with the rest of the world. He means that in a good way. It's not like back in the 50s when we could just sort of do whatever we wanted and our economy, and it would keep growing. Now we, and this is a good thing, people from other countries, smart people, are making us have to work harder in the right ways to keep up. And again, that's a good thing. And the way he puts this, as far as his philosophy towards success is, I'm sorry, do you mind going? Thank you. He recommends 3 simple principles. One is that all of us, regardless of our background, should be hungry like an immigrant. And he means that in a very positive sense. When you think about people who immigrate to our country, I don't know about all of you, my wife's an immigrant. They work for everything they get. These aren't people who are expecting, things to be given to them on a silver plate. There are exceptions, of course, everywhere, but these are people who really worked. I saw my wife's family work 80 hours a week at gas stations in order to put their kids through, a reasonable existence. To be inspired like an artisan. Have you heard through your humanities classes, history or art, etc., what an artisan is? Somebody who is more than just a worker, but somebody who approaches work as if what he or she does, and it might be art, but it could be something else, as if it really matters. One example is the greatest artisans from the Italian Renaissance often used to sign what they made, if they made a bowl or a piece of furniture, in a very discreet spot where nobody would ever know. Because, not that they were looking for accolades, but they just wanted to prove that they had put their hearts and souls into what they had created. And they were ready to put their names on it. This is something I made. So again, to be hungry like an immigrant, inspired like an artisan. And his final quote was to be like his favorite waitress. He mentioned how he once a week or so would go to a local restaurant, kind of like a Denny's, but not a chain. And he would see the same waitress every time. They'd become very good friends. This waitress had a very difficult life, but she was working her tail off, and she didn't have much control or power, but what she did control, whether it was making sure that her customers were treated right and with respect, given a little extra fruit from the fruit bowl or what have you, she always did. And for him, and I think we might all agree that whatever we do control, however we can make things better for people around us and at the same time for us, that's all a good thing. So I just liked his frame of view. Next slide, please. So that's really it. I think we're at, 12:24, so it seems like I went about 4 minutes over. I hope that was hit what people expected. Oh, my pleasure. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
So, email questions, right? I know you guys will have them later tonight. I don't want to answer everything, but,
Yep, I'll email you.
Yeah, please feel free to, and if I don't answer you till the weekend, tonight and tomorrow are going to be a little busy, but feel free to email, and I will respond by Monday.
all right, so anything you have not gotten to, get to it, all right? If you can email me your progress or submit it online, great. I'll be more happy to give you more full credit than if you wait until Monday. Remember, we only have 40-minute classes on Monday, so do that. And anything else, we'll try to get to after the final, but, it's going to take forever on this question.
Thank you. Oh, my pleasure. I lost my badge, so my name tag somewhere.
Don't worry about it.
Will they let me leave?
Yeah.